We're going to go ahead and start out right away with our SPAT and take you through the next section. And I think just from reviewing the SPATs that I've looked at so far, I compiled a set of kind of general feedback comments I had for people. One of them I think that's important to think about is if you're going to list a standard or a target, you have to explicitly teach it and measure it. So although there will be some things you teach as part of your unit that might connect to a particular standard or a particular target, you don't want to list them for listing them's sake. Because once you list them, you're responsible for teaching them and then measuring student progress. So think about that as you go through your learning targets. Also think about learning targets that might be too broad. So essentially, you're going to have a learning target or two for every lesson you teach. So think about a learning target in that smaller space sometimes. So it could be that you've listed a target now that you're going to go back and break up into 2 or 3 targets, just depending on how many lessons that you need to teach that target. So I want you to think about that. Sometimes you write a target and I think, oh, wow, that could go over 3 or 4 different days. Sometimes it behooves you to break the target up into smaller pieces so you can formatively assess and see what your progress is. Also think about the timetable to accomplish the unit. So you don't want the unit to be 4 weeks. We talked about that. So start thinking about your pacing and how long it could potentially take to teach the unit. If as you start to plan the next section, which is our scope and sequence, the thing gets just too giant, then you'll come back and revise the learning targets you have so that it fits within a reasonable time frame. Okay. Also think about when you're thinking about time and planning, think about factors that are outside your control. And we're really good at that now with COVID. But even before COVID, I've had a lot of people plan units like around the life cycle. And they have ordered little chicks that are going to come. And the students are going to study either butterflies or chicks or something like that. And the chicks never come, or they come 5 weeks later, something like that. So those would be things, those are things like that are out of your control. Sometimes like somebody planned a unit one time and they were using the science tubs and another teacher took them and they couldn't get them for 3 more weeks. So start to plan for those types of things ahead of time and start to consider them. All right, we're going to dig in now to phase 1, section 3 of assessment. And many of you have already started to write in this section, and I've been looking at and giving you some feedback. What I want to do tonight is give you some really specific feedback of what it should go in these sections and what it's going to look like as you're planning this part. We have a section here that talks about, for instance, student perceptions of learning and how you will measure that. I'm going to show you that tonight and give you some examples of that. When we think about the purpose of assessment and an assessment plan, this section should probably speak to what is the assessment going to tell you and how is it going to guide your teaching. So what's the purpose of the summative assessment? It might be more evaluative. What is the purpose of your formative assessment? How will it guide your teaching? Because although you are going to construct this unit, and before you start teaching, you're going to post it to TaskStream, you are not going to follow this plan step by step because you have to be flexible enough to react to your assessment data. So your plan is only a plan. It's not actually what's going to happen in your unit. Okay. And you'll have an opportunity to tell us about all the changes that you make in your assessment analysis. So don't worry about the fact that the plan's going to change. We expect the plan's going to change. Okay? All right. So in this section, you want to describe a little bit about that and how your formative or your pre-assessment could potentially inform differentiation, how fast or slow you go, if you have to change the scope and sequence of your unit. And that should also be, I'm sorry, my mouse is very sensitive. That should be, you should build some flexibility into that and use the assessment in that way. Okay, so I'm going to start out by reminding you of some things that you've talked about in your assessment courses. And so I want to remind you about your learning target types and the depth of knowledge or the level of Bloom's taxonomy that is required for different types of targets. So in your assessment planning that you're going to go into next, you're going to think about what types of targets have you written up in your target section. Everybody's got them up there now. But we talked about this again in your assessment course. Is it a knowledge target? Okay, does it ask for some factual information, procedural knowledge? When that happens, you're going to see verbs like I can understand, I can identify, I can list. Okay, those are knowledge targets. And knowledge targets need a knowledge assessment. This is how you're going to make a really good match with your assessment plan. A reasoning target is much higher. It's a much higher depth of knowledge. You're up at the top of Bloom's taxonomy. Okay, a reasoning target might say things like, I can infer, I can analyze, I can compare and contrast, I can group, okay, I can synthesize. Those are all reasoning targets. And they ask kids to predict, infer, classify, hypothesize. Okay, so those are reasoning targets and they need an assessment type that matches. So I've listed again 3 more. It could be performance or skill target. It could be a product target. It could even be a dispositional target. Okay. And in your target section, you should feel free to break them up into these groups if you want to. You don't have to. But if that helps you to kind of almost make a table of them in there, it'll help you make really good, clean assessment matches. And again, this is going to be shared with you tonight. As a matter of fact, I think I might have the link in the chat. I'll put it in here so you can have it tonight. And then the video will come too of this. So you will have access to all of this. Okay, along with your target types, you also have different types of assessment. So we have selected response, which is your multiple choice, true, false, fill in the blank type test. You might ask kids for a written response where they would do like a short answer, but could also be like an essay. It could be an exit ticket. We have performance assessments where we ask students to actually perform a task. Okay, and there's usually some kind of performance criteria. And when I think of that, I usually think about a rubric. And then there's personal communication, which could be just questions during instruction. It could be an oral exam. It could be like a student journal. You might interview the student. So those are some different types of assessment. And the key to this is to match them. So we want to make sure that if you have a knowledge target, that you're using an assessment method that is either rated as good or strong for your method, for your target type. You don't want something that kind of measures your target type. So knowledge, selected response, multiple choice tests, those are often great knowledge assessments. because you're at the lower end of Bloom's taxonomy. So those are really good matches. And a written response, like an exit ticket, an essay, can also be really strong. It's the best, they say, right? That or personal communication, just asking kids to tell you or show you, are also really good matches. And you can see here for reasoning, you'd want to use written response or personal communication, not so much the true false test. And then you can see the matches that you have here for skills and for products. So one thing you can do is you can create a table like this with your target types and then pair them with assessment types. So you know, you don't have to know exactly what the assessment looks like yet because you haven't designed the lessons yet, but you'll know what kind of type of assessment you're going to want to use. Okay, and I always like this chart. I think it's awesome to put all your learning targets down the left side, what type are there, and then what type of assessment should I use? That way, when you're doing your lessons and your scope and sequence, it's really easy for you to figure out what type of assessment you should plug in because you've already thought about your target. Okay, I also want to talk a little bit about this alignment of pre and post because I'm seeing some issues when I'm looking at units about making sure you have a direct comparison and a matchup of the type. So I just did this exercise as an example. It's not what you're going to do. It's an example that I want to take you through. So I am thinking that I would like to design a pre and post test for a unit that I am making. My first target is a knowledge target because you're going to have multiple targets in a unit, right? So the first target I want to address is a knowledge target. And on my pre-assessment, I am going to put 2 questions that measure knowledge. And I'm going to use multiple choice and short answer because those are really strong ways to measure a knowledge target. Skipping to the summative or the post assessment, which is going to be longer, I'm going to have 4 questions. I'm going to actually double it. I'm going to have 4 knowledge questions for that target number 1. That will be multiple choice and short answer. Okay, but I still have this, I've weighted it as double in my summative. Target 2 that I listed is a product target. Okay, and I'm going to have 2 questions related to having kids create a model. And on the summative, there's going to be 4 or 5 questions related to having them create a model. I'll double it again. I might ask them to draw the model and label it and do some things like different points in there, but it would be directly relatable. And then target 3 is a reasoning target. And question 5 might ask the kids to classify or compare. And then I would have 2 questions on the summative about classify and compare for reasoning target 3. Okay, I don't know what the pre and post looks like yet. I haven't built it, but now I have created a roadmap for how I can directly compare my pre and my post. It's fair because it's measuring the types of targets I have with the types of assessments that are strong matches. It's weighted correctly pre and post. If I have 1 question on the pre, I'm going to ask 2 on the post. If I ask 2 on the pre, I'm going to ask 4 on the post. So now I know if a student were to get 30% of the test correct, pre, and they got 85% right on the summative, I now can directly compare that and see how much growth there is between 30% and 85%. Okay, I can make a mathematical comparison for every single individual student. And that's what you want. You have to be able to measure individual students' growth as well as whole class growth. You need both. And then again, my formative at the end of these lessons where I teach this target, then this target, then this target, I would use the same type of assessment. I'm not going to ask kids to create a model on a summative if they haven't practiced and I haven't taught them how to create a model. It wouldn't be fair. Okay. All right, I'm going to stop sharing for just a minute and take some questions about the pre and post. This is probably the most crucial part of your SPAT, to be frank with you, because it's really creating this very strong roadmap before you start of what it is you're teaching and how you're going to measure it. Okay, so questions. Okay, nobody has a question. Okay, all right.
Oh, sorry, Sherry.
Yep.
I have a question.
Yep.
Could I have like more than one pre-assessment? Like if one of the things I'm doing is narrative writing, if I have them do a narrative writing sample,
Yep.
and then also do like a content-based one?
Yep.
Okay.
You absolutely could. And many people do that, especially if they have some English language arts that they are weaving in. So like if you're doing a writing lesson, a writing unit, side by side with a content area knowledge unit, I could see that you could have two different assessments if you would like.
Okay.
Okay, or you could also have a type of rubric that had a few content area targets at the beginning and then a measure for the writing, but it's probably easier to separate them, Lauren.
Okay, thank you.
As long as all your targets are represented in one test, in one space or another. Okay, and also I wanted to say, like for your ELA targets and things like that, there could be things you don't include on your pre-post that you just formatively assess. It's possible that some of those ELA targets might just be a formative check at the end of a lesson to see if people have it or not. Okay. Not every single thing has to be on that pre and post. Okay, I'm going to go back to sharing. Okay, this part is also crucial in your SPAT. And it's the thing that I think people probably have the most trouble with. So you have to set what we call the criteria for success. And I can't tell you what that is. You have to determine it for yourself. What does it look like? Some of you have like more standards-based grading and some of like competency-based grading. Some of you don't. So it's like, what is enough? Where is that spot where I think, yeah, I think if they were to score this on a assessment or this on a rubric, that would be enough to be proficient. And so you have to determine what that score is because that's your goal for every student. So you're hoping that every student can meet proficiency. Will they all meet proficiency? Perhaps not, but you're shooting for that. And you're saying, what is that? What does that look like? So carefully select and have a really good rationale. And I'll show you a way to do that in a little bit that might make more sense to you. So some of you have been saying on your SPAT, 80% of my students will meet proficiency, but you're not telling me what proficiency is. I don't know what it is. So that's the hardest thing. And it may be that you have to design your pre and post first before you actually know what proficient looks like and is, and that's okay. Okay. So here's an example of how I might think about setting proficiency. I might think about if I was to break this down as to like, what does the most excellent thing look like? And I'm going to call that a 3. And what might almost there look like? And what could basic look like? And what could, I'm still really approaching this whole idea. What could that look like? And sometimes when I do that, it allows me, like on a rubric, then it allows me to say, oh, you know what? If I can determine the theme is my target, then maybe up here in this area, maybe here's a starting point for that. And then here are some things that I might layer on to show me that they have even more than that. So these for 2, 2.5, and 3, I can determine the theme is non-negotiable for proficiency. And then if you look at these right here on the rubric, this helps me to see how I could get past just really basic understanding. And when I look down here at this row, I'm like, okay, what's good enough? Is this okay? Is this good enough? Or do I really want kids here? And then this is what above and beyond looks like. And sometimes that will help me. Okay, another thing that sometimes helps me is to look at that breakdown of my pre and my post and say, how many questions in each area would they need to get right? Do I want some to be worth more than others? Okay, so you get to make the rationale for this. You get to say, I know my kids, and here's my rationale for the score. Sometimes it may be your district sets it. On a district assessment, they may set it. Okay. All right. This is simply an assessment planning tool for you. And so it's a space where you might think I've put this in our professional year document SPAT planning masters folder. And it's just something that you could use if you would like to help you think about each of your learning targets as you go through. Here's the success criteria. Okay, if this is what I see, students probably need intervention on this target. Here's what it looks like to approach proficiency on the target. And here's what it looks like to be successful. This is enough right here. Here's what my pre-assessment for this target is, the question I might use, here's my formative, and here's my summative. So you could do one of these for every one of your learning targets if you wanted to. It's a way to think about it. Whoops, I'm sorry. All right. When it comes to measuring student perceptions, there are 2 things to think about. So we often want to measure or think about students' dispositions about the content area itself. Okay, and for instance, in math, if I Google math dispositional surveys, I'm going to get a whole bunch of surveys related to, do I feel like a mathematician? When I do math, I feel like this. I have an easy time with this, but not with that. So there's a lot of different surveys out there you could use for older students and for younger students. You want to actually match the survey to their age range. You also could just create your own. Maybe you just want to ask them 3 different questions about how they feel about the content. You know, we're about to go into a unit on integers. You know, have you heard of integers before? How do you feel about tackling this? You know, it can be very simple. Some people make it part of their pre-test. They might even throw a couple of dispositions on their pre and post test. And you can do that as well. It's really there to just guide your instruction. Any of you who've worked with younger children might recognize the reading attitude survey with the little Garfields on them. So that was just an example I put. But again, you have to match the perception survey to your students. The other thing we want to look at is dispositions of your students about your teaching. So there are other ways to get at that, but I have provided for you the tripod survey of student perceptions. It deals with what we call the 7 C's. And it has to do with things like care. How much do I think my teacher cares about me? Control. Does my teacher have control of the classroom? Does she clarify when I don't, or he, when I don't understand? There's 7 of them. I have put, there's a lower elementary grade version, there's an upper elementary grade, and there's a secondary version. I have put them in the folder for you to access. You don't have to ask all the questions on the survey. If you're particularly wondering, I'm kind of wondering, I'm teaching a unit on science and there's going to be all these materials out and we're going to be doing all this moving around the classroom. I'm really wondering, did I have good control over the class when we were doing all these hands-on activities? So I'm going to choose a few of those control questions to ask my students. During COVID, we've been remote back and forth. I'm wondering, do the students really feel like I care about them? So I might pick some of those questions. You could do the whole thing, or you could select some questions off of here to ask the students. It will end up being part of your data analysis in the end, and you'll reflect on the data that you get back. It's not a test for you. Like if the students are like, nah, my teacher's mean to me, you're not going to fail student teaching. It's a data point for you to look at and self-reflect at the end. Okay, it's really like information for you. So there are other student perception surveys out there of their teachers' practice. If you find one that you like, you are welcome to use that. And again, you're welcome to select some questions that interest you off the tripod surveys related to your students' age group. Or some people even construct their own survey of student perceptions, and that's okay too. It should be about what you connect with and what you're wondering about. All right. Your SPAT unit's going to ask you to upload an assessment plan table. You are welcome to use the one I showed you earlier with the 3 different colors on it. If you wanted to do one for every learning target, you are certainly welcome to upload that in place of this table, but you can also make things simple for yourself. And we have one of these in our folder for you. All of your learning targets will go down the left side. This is just an example I'm showing you. This person obviously is teaching a math unit, okay? But you are welcome, you are certainly welcome to put all of your content targets, ELA targets, your dispositional targets, and I call those tripod surveys, those student perception questions, almost like personal targets for you. Okay, this particular teacher was interested in the construct of challenge. She felt like the group she was working with needed some engagement and challenge, and so she asked a few questions related to that. Novelty has to do with engagement. Was she clear with her directions, which was content clarity, and did the kids feel safe? So those were the 3 areas this particular teacher's explored. You could put personal targets, you could put whatever you want there, okay? You'll see this teacher, their content, they used the same pre-test as the post. It was exactly the same. Questions 1 through 15 dealt with place value. Questions 11 through 15, strategies and models. 8 through 15 was operations. 10s and 1s was question 3 and 15. And adding and subtracting was question 3 and 15. So they have made a direct proportional alignment with their pre and post. I could look at this and see it right away. Okay. Up here, don't worry about what it says. This is just their formatives. So this person had exit ticket week 1, week 2, week 3, week 4. They had a quiz, but they're putting X's in the places where it is aligned to the learning target. So exit ticket for week 2 right here is measuring tens and ones, adding and subtracting, strategies and models, and place value. Okay, the exit ticket for week 1 is only looking at place value and operational relationships. There certainly should not be a target where you don't have a formative assessment. There could be a target where you don't have a pre and a post. And you can see that down here in the ELA targets. Okay. This person had a section for their tripod survey. You can see this is where they asked those personal target questions. They had they did a pre and post dispositions about how do you feel about yourself as a mathematician. And you can see they did pre and post here. This will get embedded into your, will get embedded into your template. You'll embed it in there. Okay. In the end, the reason why that criteria for success and the reason why your pre and post is so important is because at the end, you're going to rate your impact on student learning, or what we call your student learning outcomes, SLOs. People will call them SLOs. Okay. And you're going to see how effective your unit was. Again, just like the tripod survey, if you have a unit that is ineffective, so fewer of 60% meet or exceed your criteria for success, you do not fail student teaching. Okay, what we expect for you to be able to do then is go back and analyze what happened. Why did so few students meet the learning targets? What happened? And you'll do an analysis and you'll figure out where things went wrong, because that's what real teachers have to do. Not everything you plan comes out great. And you learn over time, you develop over time, and you become more effective as you go. We certainly hope you have a highly effective unit or an effective unit, but as a novice out there planning a big unit for the first time, we realize there could be things that go wrong in the way you have constructed your assessment. There could be things that have gone wrong in, like, did you spend enough time on particular topics? And we'll do all of that analysis. I'll help you with it when we get into the analysis section. Okay. All right. And last, you'll want to do what I call an equity check-in. You're going to want to, when you design your actual assessments, you're going to want to think about the language expectations for your assessments. Can students, I've had people actually design like true false questions and essay questions for students that actually couldn't write yet, or actually couldn't read the questions, or the questions were written in such a complicated way that the kids couldn't understand them. So you have to think about the accessibility of your assessments to all the learners in your class. And then you really want to think, are they actually measuring what you want them to measure without any barriers in your method? So if I ask kids to write an essay, but I've got 3 or 4 kids who actually are not ready to write an essay, I have to provide them with an alternate means of assessment, or I won't know what they know about the content. If they can't tell me through writing, I have to give them a way to tell me, or it's not fair. It's not equitable. Okay, last thing, you're going to leave your language targets blank for now, because really, we can't know the language expectations for your individual lessons until you develop your scope and sequence. We will come back to this. We will look at the lessons you've planned, and then we'll start thinking about what are the language demands of those particular lessons. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing. And let's go ahead now and ask any questions that you have about this next step. This is a hard part. I think the assessment planning part is difficult. I hope the tools that I've given you through those charts to think about, do you have matches? You know, what is the structure of the assessment planning going to look like? will help you think about it, because you're not actually making all the little formative assessments yet. You're just trying to figure out what type at this point. Well, after we do the scope and sequence, of course, you'll have to design those. You should start thinking about designing your pre-post. What does the pre look like? What does the post look like?
Sherry, I have a question.
Yeah.
On the student teaching schedule, it says that our scope and sequence is due for feedback this Sunday.
Yeah, we'll stretch that out. We're not ready for that quite yet. This is kind of a fluid process. We're just not quite there. If there is a person who is designed their scope and sequence already, please send it to me. But what will be due is you're going to send me I want to see everything through the assessment part.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, that was a great question. Let's just concentrate on that part right now. Unless you want to move faster, and you're always welcome to do that.